Going on multiple first dates, like, holy that sounds
exhausting.
In my world, like the most horrendous thing ever.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Well, is he just going to show up at your front door while you're watching Netflix in your pajamas or your Snuggie, and he's going to be like, "Hey, I'm here."
That would be the male that is most frequently at my house, would be the DoorDash delivery guy.
Like, that sounds like somebody who writes a porn script is narrating the conversation right now, which is also funny.
This is Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Hey, and welcome back to Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Joining me today is my friend Dave Glaser. Dave is a relationship coach and also provides a whole lot of relationship insights on TikTok. And even though Dave and I are experts in this field, just like you guys, our dating lives could use some work. Listen in as we talk all about our first date struggles. Dave. We go way back with our conversations on relationships.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Way back. I know, I was thinking about that, and I was saying before we started recording that I think so far the guests I've had on, and probably that I will have on in the near future, you and I have definitely had the most real life conversations about relationships. Like, that's really how we connected, was on how similar, like, our values, our struggles, all of that.
Struggles for sure.
All of that aligns.
Yeah, struggles resonates.
For sure. I know. And that's, I think back. So you and I actually, we connected shortly after I got divorced, and you had asked me to come on the podcast. And then, yeah, I think we've kind of then over the years since then talked about some of our commitment stuff, some of our dating app flops. Where are you at right now with your relationship success or lack thereof?
I'm reflecting on that word success or failure. I spend a little bit more time on TikTok than Instagram nowadays. And I got some feedback the other day that was like, wait, you talk about this year-long relationship you had, but why would you call that a success? And when I sat with it and I thought about the question, yeah, a lot of people think that successful relationships have to last forever. That is kind of the narrative that was taught to us, through generations, or at least it was taught to me. And then I think about it, I'm like, well, it was a success because I learned something about myself. It was a success because I opened myself up to somebody else, and I took risks, and I faced those fears that show up for me in dating.
Right. What was their point in that it couldn't be successful because it was over?
I believe that was the point.
Wow.
And I think that's really something that could be a great teaching opportunity or learning opportunity for a lot of people who are out there single.
Sure. I agree. And I mean, what my relationship is like with Richard, my ex, and we most definitely consider that a success, because in spite of us not being in a romantic relationship anymore, like, we're family, we're each other's support system. And so I would by far consider that my most successful relationship in life, and it's my divorce.
Yeah, I love that perspective, because outside looking in, I have absolutely no business telling you that that's not a success at all.
Yeah.
It does give me an opportunity to, like, get curious as a friend and say, like, okay, tell me more. That's not common. Tell me more about what you're going through right now.
I'm going to take that as rhetorical. What was that like for you, though, when she said it wasn't a success? Did it sting? Was it offensive? Or I guess it could have been a he. I don't know why I assumed she. Did you say she?
Well, probably because most of my audience is women on social media.
Yeah, what do you think that's about, Dave?
Laws of attraction. A lot of things. When I show up as my authentic self, women gravitate to that, of platonically, professionally, romantically. And sometimes it doesn't resonate with men. And I get that. That's a big reason why I'm a part of 2 small men's groups, so that I don't need to resonate with any one specific person on a grandiose scale. Like, I've got my core group of 4 guys over here who are my church men's group. And then I've got my 10 to 12 guys on the other side that are more of my philosophy based or relationship based or life based men's group.
Do you think though that partly maybe it doesn't resonate with men because of like, and I'm sure you do think this, because of our societal, like the influence of that? Because you and I had a conversation, I don't know, maybe a year ago or something. We were texting about where we both were at with our basically dating and relationships and stuff like that. And I don't remember how you worded it. Something like, basically it came down to me expressing that, I think you said, what would safe mean to you? Was that, do you remember this conversation?
Because it had to have been right after my breakup. If you're talking about a year ago, my last relationship ended at the beginning of August last year. So yeah, the question resonates with me. What does safe mean to you? You know?
And I wonder though, like if a lot of men don't think in that way, because my response was like, well, I want somebody who's assertive, but also who can hold space for my emotions, who can demonstrate nurture, who can be soft and sensitive while also being, I don't know what words would be politically correct on the other side of that.
Yeah, if I understand what you're saying, men don't resonate with what I share on social media because it's a reflection for them of like, what am I dealing with in my own life, my own insecurities, my own relationship, or my own professional life. Like I do a lot of work every day. Right. And sometimes, you know, you were talking about the societal expectations and stereotypes are that men just don't do that.
Right.
And so if my message or if my persona that I put out there online it's not relating to men, that could be one reason why.
Isn't that so fascinating though, that it's so relatable to such a large female audience? Yet when we're thinking about like partnerships and stuff like that, now, of course, it can be partnerships of whatever genders together, but that's fascinating to me of how many men are truly like missing the mark and don't even give a shit to try to tune in to find out like why.
Yeah. There might be something else there to it of like, well, Dave, you talk about all this stuff and you host this podcast, but you're not in a relationship. And men want results, right?
Sure.
Men want the results. They're like, well, what do you mean I'm going to do all this work and you're saying that I might not even find a relationship?
What do you say to that?
Maybe, what's that?
What do you say to that?
Well, after understanding what that question was like in my own life of like, well, if I'm outcome dependent, then I'm going to be less likely to maintain a relationship. If I'm always worried about, okay, if I do this, what am I going to get in the return?
Right. You know, that's interesting because I've been talking to my close humans about that recently in terms of that thought. Even so, as I was launching this podcast and I'm like thinking in terms of the same thing. And you and I have kind of connected on that as well, that we both are big into dating and relationship world, yet we spend quite a bit of our time not in a relationship. So we'll get to that down the road. But my thoughts around that, I was like, you know, I really got to shift my focus to not send the message that like, I'm here to provide content to help you get into a relationship, because that is not my objective. Like when I really sit down and process through that, like my objective is to help you heal from your relational trauma. And then my objective is to help you be healthy when you're in a relationship. But clearly I'm no expert at getting into one. So like, I really kind of had to reframe that I'm like, okay, don't tune it. Like I'm not going to tell you how to find a partner, but I can tell you how to get healthy and then how to be healthy.
Sure.
So it sounds like similar to what people push back with you.
It's possible. And, you know, I don't have a hard time getting first dates. My coworkers give me a really hard time of like, how many was it last week, Dave? I'm like,
that's
I don't know. But what it comes down to is like, I enjoy meeting people. I enjoy getting to know people. I enjoy eating out. I enjoy trying new coffee shops. I enjoy seeing what Colorado has to offer. And if it happens to be on a first date, great. And in order to get to that second date, I'm looking for a little bit more than what I find 9 times out of 10. But if I'm afraid of going on the first date, I'll never even know that.
Well, what if we're not afraid? Maybe we're just annoyed by it. Maybe it just doesn't sound appealing or a good use of our time.
Well, then certainly it's time to take a break and not be out in the dating pool.
Well, you can't take a break if you haven't started because it's like, but I mean, I guess that's a good point. That's yes. So I had a dating coach on recently and he was saying like, well, clearly you want a relationship. Like if you're putting that out there in that way. And I'm like, yeah, that's a really great point. I don't really know. But as you're saying, going on multiple first dates, like, holy fuck, that sounds
exhausting.
In my world, like the most horrendous thing ever.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Well, is he just going to show up at your front door while you're watching Netflix in your pajamas or your Snuggie? And he's going to be like, hey, I'm here.
God, I hope so. Is that too much to ask?
Well, I don't want to gloss over any one particular. That's hilarious. Thank you.
Melissa's tuning in from the studio. She said it will likely be my DoorDash delivery guy. And she is not wrong because that would be the male that is most frequently at my house would be the DoorDash delivery guy.
Like that sounds like somebody who writes a porn script is narrating the conversation right now, which is also funny. But what I was going to say, and thank you for that commentary there, Melissa, that going on dates is part of the work. Right. If we're avoiding going on first dates and still wishing for a relationship, well, then we're going to have to take a look at why we're avoiding first dates.
Sure.
Agree?
I totally agree. And then I'm going to flip it back on you and wonder why does hardly anyone get past the first date? What's going on your end that's, and I hear what you're saying, like your expectations and things like that. But do you ever feel like your expectations are keeping you safe? I like that little eyebrow raise you're giving me as you know exactly where I'm going.
It's possible. I couldn't really anticipate, me focusing on the safety part or me actually preventing myself from going on second dates. Cause I've asked plenty of times, like, hey, I had a great time on the first date. This is really great about expectations, actually. Hey, I had a really good time on our taco, coffee, lunch date, whatever. I'd like to see you again. What's your schedule like this coming weekend? And often I get the thank you, but no thank you. Hey, Dave, I had a great time as well. I'm just not feeling the connection. And it goes both ways, like if I put that out there after the first date and I get asked out again, hey, I'm just not feeling the connection. I think that's a really great thing that I'm receiving that in return, as opposed to like being ghosted or like being strung along. But when you ask that question, it gives me an opportunity to reflect at my own behavior. Like, Dave, it sounds like you're going on a lot of first dates. Why aren't there second ones? And what I've come to understand recently, and you're going to laugh when I say this because it's so obvious, is that I'm not as selective as I could be in order to get the first date. And so if I'm going on the first dates and there's not a lot of second ones, it's like, all right, was I pre-screening as much as I possibly could have in order to find connection, chemistry, compatibility, and communication? Probably not, but that doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. Sure. I think what I'm doing here is I'm exploring who I am in the world. And I just happen to enjoy going to coffee, going to dinner, going to lunch. And I also happen to spending time with people I could possibly kiss at the end of those dates.
Sure. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing at all. Like, what I do want to acknowledge is I didn't answer your question earlier.
What was my question earlier? I have so many of them.
Yeah, you asked me a very specific question, and it'll come to me in a minute, but it was really important. I don't want to forget it. I don't want to gloss over it, and I don't want to deflect from that question either.
I appreciate the self-awareness, Dave.
Yeah, you bet. At self-awareness, I mean, I'm sitting with self-awareness a lot, and you and I talk about it a lot. You gave me the reflection once of like, Dave, you're really self-aware, and I appreciated that compliment. I took it that way. And then I got this reflection on a 2-month-long. It wasn't a situationship. It was actually dating, but our schedules allowed it only 3 dates in 2 months, which is not a lot, right?
Sure.
And the reflection that I got from this is that we faced a bit of conflict or misunderstanding or lack of compatibility on the third date. And the self-awareness that I could take away from this is I could have apologized. And
to her.
Yeah, to her. She apologized to me, and I was like, thank you very much for saying that. I appreciate it. I respect where you're coming from. And she was offering up, I respect where you're coming from too as well, Dave. And that felt really good. And in this opportunity, I'm like, my self-awareness is lacking on why I didn't apologize. What could I take responsibility for in that situation? And it might have actually been a meme you shared the other day. So thank you for that. I think you said you can be triggered and still understand your responsibility or your part in the situation, in the scenario. And yes, I felt emotional. I felt the emotions come up. And I also, in the day or two or week after, I didn't own my part on this third date.
What did something happen that I'm missing that what are we apologizing
That's
for?
actually a really good question. And I could take ownership that I showed up in a way that I'm not proud of, that's an old version of me, of the person who's like in a moment becoming emotional, but not angry, not rageful, just reactive, right? And instead of responding, I reacted, and that's what I can take ownership of.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like you recognize you have a lot of self-awareness, but then you're also recognizing when you don't.
I have gaps, yeah.
And when that happens for you, like, what does that create for you?
Self-criticism.
So, and how does that benefit you?
Ooh, there's therapist Liz right there.
Well, I'm curious, like, it sounds like personal improvement obviously is such a big deal to you. That is so much of your life. But do you find that you are like overly critical of yourself in these situations, and like that shows up as a barrier? Because if it's like, if you're like, where's the space and grace for like human Dave?
I appreciate the question. And this is another opportunity for me to grow, right? Of like, what does forgiveness look like for myself? And how can I give myself that grace and compassion when I show up? Not fully, I don't show up as my fully authentic self, I revert back to an old version of myself. And there's a couple of different things that show up for me in our conversation is like, guilt can be a great motivator for change behavior.
Sure.
Like if I experience guilt for my behavior and I feel guilty for not showing up as my authentic self, I showed up as my old version. And that guilt, which is different from self-criticism in my world, if I change behavior based on that guilt, well, then I get the opportunity to grow even more. And it's another slingshot opportunity going forward. Now I'm taking ownership of more things that I'm playing my part in.
Right.
So I am grateful for that. And that's where compassion and grace and forgiveness comes into my world. And I'm self-critical that I know better. I'm self-critical that I do the work in order for, let's say, like all the times I'm not dysregulated. That's training for the times when I am dysregulated.
Sure.
I do all this. I train jujitsu 3 or 4 times a week. And I submitted a teammate and he got really upset, and I could feel all that emotion coming out of him. He was just seething. He was internally just struggling with the submission, and in his emotional state, I was able to take advantage of that and submit him a couple more times. And I could just feel that emotion continue to go on. And he kept coming, we have 7-minute rounds. So there's a lot of opportunity to spar in that time. And the last time that he came at me, I'm like, pause. I feel a lot of emotion from you right now. And it doesn't feel safe in our environment. What's going on? What's coming up for you? And you could see that regulation come back of like, yeah, you're right. And then we continued on.
Is that an approach that you use relationally? Like, obviously that was relationally because you clearly have a relationship with somebody to be able to be that vulnerable or that even assertive in that moment. Do you find that you do that in relationship with women? Why are you laughing about that?
I'm laughing because the genders matter here. The energy between us matter. He was a male sparring partner, and it's a jujitsu environment, so sex is off the table, right?
Sure.
Well, in a relationship, there's the opportunity for loss, fear of loss. There's opportunity for like a relationship to end, right? And so that's the emotion that shows up for me between the two is like, oh, well, I don't mind if this teammate never wants to spar with me again. That's non-attachment showing up in my life. Well, it's very difficult for me in my experience to not become attached in a romantic relationship. And that's the work. That's what I get to do outside of a relationship to prepare me for the next one.
Sure.
So if we're going on all these first dates and there are fewer second dates than first, well, then I get to see that reflection and growth in self-awareness of like, I'm still getting attached in the old version of myself.
Sounds like maybe you're not going to the second date because of the fear of attaching as quickly as you're expressing that you do.
Yes, and I think that I don't want to use the first thing that came up for me because that's not the truth. The fear of attaching in the way that I used to. I'm sitting with this growth or this experience as tending to show up avoidant in the past, straight up avoidant, like avoidant attachment style was my thing. That was my tendency. And growing into finding myself attaching more anxiously recently. And it's uncomfortable because we acknowledge this all the time that when we're outside of a relationship, we are securely attached, right? We feel more secure in our central nervous system. And then a person that we want to get to know better no longer wants to see you. Oh, well, then we have this anxiety show up.
Right.
And for a securely attached person, anxiety is normal. They're going to experience it, even in dating. For an anxiously attached person, which I don't relate to as much as an avoidant, but I am now, well, that's new. That's uncomfortable. That's an opportunity for growth.
When did that shift happen for you?
When I stopped drinking.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was no longer medicating with an external source.
Got it. Okay. So then you started to feel the anxiety that was there, but that you had found a way to avoid through this coping mechanism.
Numbing agent. Yeah.
Yeah. So then recognizing that anxiety coming up for you, do you, okay, don't take this with like any offense intended, but do you feel like as you're getting older, it creates more anxiety around trying to secure a relationship?
No, age doesn't really resonate with me right now because I don't act 42 and I don't feel 42 except for my low back.
Yeah.
One dimension of that work that we keep talking about is facing our fear of death, right? Like acknowledging that death is a part of life. And so as I age, that's the work that I do. Not so much in like, oh, I'm 42 or I'm 43. I need to get a relationship. I'll die alone. Well, I'm not afraid of death because the embodiment work that I choose to do, I simulate death 3 to 4 times a week because we get choked out or at our jujitsu school.
Some kinky stuff you got going on there, Dave. But regardless of fear of death, are you not, isn't it more about the fear of growing old alone? Like, I don't think it's the fear of, I'm not necessarily saying for you, but I wonder for people, it's not like, I hear that you're saying the fear of death. Yes, that's in one category. But when we think about it in terms of relationships, I think about it like growing old alone. Like who's going to be there? I even have realized that I moved into a new house about a year ago, and I'm like, it's a lot of fucking work to maintain a house on your own. Like, it's like, I need to husband for hire for like IT shit, for like my yard, and so that's what I think about. I think like the rest of my life, that sounds so bad. Like, I just need a man to do shit for me. Yeah, I guess I could hire that. But that's that's my thought, is like, that feels really lonely to do the next 50 years or whatever.
Right.
Like, it's a lot of work.
It is. Growing old alone doesn't scare me because my life is so full as it is. I have my daughter, a wonderful part of my life. I have my friendships, and I have my men's groups, and I have activities that I love that I do on my own. And so that fear of growing old alone doesn't land with me as much as, say, like a desire for companionship.
Okay, so it's less about a fear and more about a desire.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear you talking about the tasks around the house, the pride of ownership being draining on you. And, you know, as a business owner, I can make a lot of guesses or assumptions that you spend a lot of time in the masculine energy. And when you come home, you don't want to keep fucking doing it. What's that?
What gives you that idea?
Because you're
I'm kidding. You
driven.
know.
No, yeah, you're driven. You're an expert in your field. You have a lot on your plate. And so what I hear you describing there, when you get home of this home ownership, you can have a lot of pride in your home and still not want to do the work, because that keeps you in your masculine. When you're in your home, your safe space, the structure around you is meant to keep you energetically safe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that is, yeah. And you and I have explored this many times, that masculine energy that I have and that I have to maintain as a business owner, as a, everything that I do alone, which is not fair to say. I have a lot of support from people around me, but that at the end of the day, it is on my shoulders. And that, and I always say, like, I identify as a feminist, but I think feminists might also not prefer this side of me, because then there is the side of me that I do want to be taken care of by a man at the end of the day. Like, that is, and it's not just about being taken care of. Like, I want the nurture, I want the connection. And I don't want to always have to be in my masculine energy. And that is so true.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be, which is, people find surprising. Like, I do have the ability not to be, but I have the ability, but not the opportunity very often.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so very much for that. I think this is a really good opportunity to talk about a relationship dynamic that people argue about a lot, right? Like, oh, she nags me all the time to get the trash done or mow the lawn or fix this. And my honey-do list is really long. And the feminine in the partnership, she doesn't even have to be a woman, but the feminine energy in the relationship is like, I'm so tired of nagging. I'm so tired of asking him to get this done. And the key thing that I've come to understand over the past few years is the feminine doesn't care if the masculine does it himself. She cares that the job gets done. He could outsource all of that handiwork to other people, and she would feel safe. She would feel seen. She would feel heard. And he would have all this freedom that he craves. The masculine craves freedom in the relationship and in his own life too. And I think that this is the best unsolicited advice I can give on this one topic, is like, don't expect men, or I'll speak to the masculine right now. It's like, don't expect that she wants you to do it all yourself. It's not what they're asking for. Just ask for help from a handyman or a lawn service or somebody to paint your house. Just ask for help and get the job done.
Are you telling that to my masculine energy?
No way. No.
You know better than that.
Yeah, exactly. That puts you back in your masculine, and I don't want to have that for you. I love your feminine energy.
I appreciate that. I wonder if this ties into, well, and I guess do you identify as having commitment issues? And where I'm wondering this is because, and you might not identify that way, but I might identify you that way. But anyway, I think that the idea being, as you're saying, so So you just said like you don't have to do everything on your own, like that, and you're talking specifically, you're talking less relationally and more specifically task driven. But I think that's a really good point, and that ties into my commitment issues, is whether it's personally, professionally, friends, whatever the case, I have this belief that I will be let down. So I will either be abandoned, I will be rejected, someone will not hold up to their end of the bargain, they will not follow through in the way that, you know, all of those things that I think keeps me insulated, like in general. So there's my self-awareness for you, that I have great awareness around that. But I find it interesting that you were shaking your head no, that you don't identify with commitment issues.
No, my issues are not in committing to somebody else.
What are they in?
My issues are in the selection process to get to that commitment. It's
okay, but like, sorry, go on.
I don't know, what's on your mind? I want to hear it.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, in terms of that selection process, is it by chance set up more by design?
As in, I'm choosing my selection process to self-sabotage to prevent myself from even getting close.
You said it, not me. I'm just curious.
I was definitely filling in the gaps of your question. So how the, as you said it, commitment issues may show up in my life is I'm judgmental, I'm critical, I expect perfection out of myself. And those are all things that I'm aware of and working on. I receive those reflections from my own counselor and then the men in my life. I was golfing with a buddy of mine. He and I have golfed regularly for 2 or 3 years now. And the most recent time that we golfed, he's like, Dave, I don't hear you criticizing your game, your swing, your performance, not like I used to.
That's a big deal.
It's a huge thing. It's a huge thing for a man in my life for the past 4.5 years to actually reflect that back to me. And I was
it's a big
really
deal
appreciative.
that you clearly put in work around that as well, because we know that the perfectionism that is in ourselves, it's really hard not to project that onto others. And so when you're talking about being judgmental or critical or all of those things, I think about that a lot as well, that my really just wild expectations of myself, there's like, clearly I am projecting that on to other people as well. So is that, do you see, does that show up for you at all, that when you're talking about, it sounds like the judgment, the being critical is maybe directed at self and others?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, definitely. I went on a first date last week, and in this reflection, I view first dates as like an opportunity to see myself in others, right? Intimacy. Into me I see, into you I see, and into we I see. And I took this opportunity to hear her say, I'm not expecting you to be perfect, Dave. Twice. I heard this twice on a first date. I was like, you know, this is a first date. We don't know each other very well. This is likely not about me. So I can sit in that moment and actually hear what the feminine is trying to say, of like, okay, well, that perfection is not about me because we just met. How could it possibly be about me? Right. You know, and there was a moment at the end of the date where like she mentioned, hey, I'm going to order an Uber. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll use the restroom. I'll come back and I'll walk you out. And from that moment on, the demeanor and the energy changed. It was as if like I missed a perfect step in the date of like, no, would you like a ride home? Or something in that interaction brought up an emotional response in this other person. And I wasn't going to spend time on trying to figure that out. Right. Because that's not my responsibility in the moment or even after. But like walked her out and she like sprinted to the Uber, like no hug, no good night, nothing. Just like as soon as the Uber showed up, boom, like walked quickly across the street, and I was left, well, that was interesting. I don't know what was there at all. And I'm not looking for answers. I'm not looking for like an explanation or anything like that.
Sure.
But it's an opportunity for me. Like, I heard you say twice that you're not looking for perfect. Well, what mistake did I make there at the end that brought up that perfectionism in me to make me reflect that way and to become self-critical in a little bit? Like, it didn't last very long,
Right.
because we know that there's not going to be a second date. So the criticism there doesn't last long for me.
So you felt like that was more a reflection of what was going on for her, though, versus something you had actually done wrong.
Yeah, which makes it a great opportunity for me not to take it personally.
Sure.
You know, I love the 4 agreements, but it's hard sticking to them.
Absolutely. How much of a barrier do you think that your self-awareness becomes in your dating life? Because that's like one thing, like on the very few dates I have gone on, that's always the joke that has to be made about that I'm clearly psychoanalyzing them. And I'm like, well, clearly, but you know, like whatever that's whatever that looks like. And so, but what they don't realize is that I am just as self-aware and analyzing my interactions just as much as I'm analyzing theirs. But I also have clients that say that, like, as they're doing the work and as they're healing and becoming more aware of their triggers and how they show up when they're triggered and that type of thing, I have a lot of clients say that the increase in self-awareness is almost overwhelming. Like, it's, you know, you are constantly, it's like you're watching a chess game every date you're going on. How does that show up for you in that way, or does it?
Yeah, it certainly is showing up more recently. I always took a sense of pride in that self-awareness. You know, it's one thing that I'm really proud of myself for doing all the work. And I have to be grounded in the understanding that I'm not doing it for anybody else. I'm doing it for me. And there's...
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
There's a time and a place for that self-awareness and that analysis, right? The time and the place for self-awareness and all of the analysis is not on the first date. It's actually after the first date or before the first date. And I talk to a lot of people about, like, well, what is your body telling you about going to that first date? Are they butterflies, or is it anxiety on your drive or on your Uber ride over to the first date? Your body is sending you a signal. The body is sending me a signal to say, like, you're not open to this. You're not wanting this. It doesn't feel aligned for you. And the opportunity for reflection and to gain self-awareness is after the first date. Because if I'm sitting there analyzing myself and the other person the entire time on the first date, I'm not present. And
but you clearly were analyzing some, because you caught on to the fact that she said the perfectionism thing a couple times, and then the situation that happened at the end. So with your amount of knowledge, you clearly are doing some analyzing.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because there's a difference here between truly listening to another person and hearing what they have to say and setting it aside for later. Right? Okay, I heard that. I'm not going to spend any time on it right now while I'm on the date, but I am going to save it for later, because I felt my body in the moment of, like, well, when I hear somebody say, I don't expect you to be perfect on a first date, my body sends a response. And I get to check in with that and say, okay, set that aside for later, Dave. And if that was an isolated incident, okay, no big deal. But it was that and the interaction at the end of the date that was like, okay, focus on that at another time, maybe on the drive home or later that night when I'm reflecting on, okay, well, it's 8 o'clock. I've got till 9:30 bedtime, whatever. I got an hour to spend on this. I get to be the detective in my own life and say, like, what was my body telling me in that moment?
Right. Yeah. Which I totally hear that. I think that when people are first learning the awareness of all these interactions and the awareness even of what's going on in their body. I think it's probably really hard for a lot of people to do all of that multitasking at once, right? To have that interaction take place, to have their body respond. Now all of a sudden I'm aware of what's going on in my body. What does that mean? Where it's, and to be able to, so it sounds like it's over time of doing it again and again and again that you learn how to set that aside and stay present in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't even really come from repetition of like dates, right? The repetition of, say, cold showers for 2 years prepares me for that in attunement to my own body's response and my ability to set it aside for later. It's not as if like I step into a cold shower every day anticipating that I'm going to have to like do this on a date.
Sure.
It makes it easier for me to access that while I am on a date and where I could potentially get dysregulated.
Yeah.
Because nothing will challenge us as much as our romantic relationships or parenting.
Yeah. That is very true. And that makes sense. The most important relationships in our world, of course, are going to challenge us in that way. How many dates do you suggest, like when you're working with your clients and stuff like that? I had a client ask me recently, she went on a first date. She was like, wasn't horrible. It was a very funny story actually, but still wasn't horrible. But she was like, I can't decide if I want to go on another one. Like she, no serious red flags or anything, just not a whole lot of chemistry. And so my suggestion was, what I told her is that I generally don't like connection, chemistry, all those things that I end up having with somebody. It happens over time for me. A lot of people will say, oh, when it just automatically clicks, things like that. And I think that there are like maybe little moments of sparks and stuff that are there. But for me to really know, like, I want to invest time in this person, like, I'm not going to know that for a while. And so I kind of just, said, if there was no big reason not to, if you're kind of on the fence about it, you didn't notice any big red flags, like, you don't know what time can do for you. But what do you usually suggest, when you're working with clients and stuff, or even for yourself? Like, what is your own motto on that?
Yeah, I'm a lot like you when I'm working with people, but in my own experience, I matched with this girl on Tinder. This was like 4 years ago or something like that. Gorgeous girl, single mom. It took us a while to set up the first date because of our schedules and things like that. And went on the first date, and there was some good conversation, good understanding, values were lining up, and there was enough of a conversation, enough of an interest to plan a second date. It was on the second date that it really became blah,
Got it.
So for both reasons, we want to give it another try. On the first date, if we are feeling that instant spark, if we are feeling that instant attraction, and we're like, yes, I definitely want to go on a second date, well, then there's just as much there to tune into as if there's no connection or no chemistry. And there have been a few times in my life where I'm like, yes, absolutely, I enjoy this person as a person. I didn't feel that physical attraction. I didn't feel the spark, but I am going to decide for myself to investigate further, to understand more about myself. Am I avoiding something here? Am I tuning in, or am I listening too much to the narrative of like, oh, when you know,
Yeah.
Because what I really appreciate about some of the things you share and some of the other things that, maybe Talia or the Angry Therapist share, or Mark Groves are like, well, a good relationship isn't going to be exciting all the time. It might actually be a little bit boring through certain phases in our lives and in this relationship.
Sure.
And I'm looking forward to the boredom.
Well, if you can learn how to tolerate it, right? But a lot of people who haven't addressed that relational programming and they are wired for the chaos, the boredom feels worse to them than the hard times. And so I think that is something, being aware of that yes, the boredom should indicate some level of safety, but for some people it really indicates this is concerning. This is uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, some people think, yeah, thank you for that. That's just a good redirect of like, there's a lot of possibilities in the boredom,
Yeah.
and we're not seeking out the boredom. But like, I could understand that in the dynamic that we were talking about earlier of like, she doesn't care if you do the work yourself. Well, if we're offloading all of this housework onto a handyman or onto a lawn service or onto like somebody else to shovel the driveway, how freaking exciting is it to be that he's got the free time to flirt with you, to spend time with you, to focus on himself and self-care, and then to co-create or build that life together, because yes, shit's getting done, and making time for each other, because we're not spending all of our free time or all of our downtime, all of our boredom time on a to-do list.
Yeah. Which is so interesting, that the irony between that we hear so often, that one or both partners isn't doing what the other partner needs them to do from a task perspective. But then we're also hearing simultaneously that they don't have enough time for each other, right?
Yeah.
That he or she or whatever, they don't make enough time for me. And I mean, that's a great insight on that time, both can exist. We can get the job done and we can create opportunity for time together.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that growing up in my parents' relationship, where every Saturday my dad had this to-do list, and oftentimes it was self-imposed. It was his task list. No, it
Right.
wasn't a honey-do list. But I never observed in my family system that quality time, that flirtation. I saw so much boredom in my childhood, in my parents' relationship.
Interesting. What are your love languages, by the way, before we wrap up?
Quality time and physical touch.
Oh, well, there you go. Quality time is huge for me, for sure. But what? Were you going to say something?
I give love with acts of service.
Okay.
Quality time and acts of service are how I show love.
Well, I'm assuming unless your partner desires something else, and then
yeah. Yes, I struggle with giving words of affirmation as a love language. And I'm a little bit, I do enjoy giving gifts. However, like, my daughter is not a gift. That is not her love language at all. So when I give her a gift, it's like, oh, okay, thanks, and sets it aside. And I have to understand that like, that's not about me. And that relationship is still important to me, even if the gift doesn't like blow her mind. Like,
sure. Well, and I think that's a good parallel to a lot of this, is that you said it earlier, taking that step back, that not everything is a reflection of something we have done, and taking the time to really recognize. And again, it goes back to the self-awareness, and really the theme of this conversation is having that self-awareness, but also the other awareness. And so not everything is going to be a reflection of something you have done right or wrong. And, but being aware of checking in on that is crucial.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
Dave, where can people find you? Sounds like you are on TikTok and not on Instagram as much as you're saying.
Instagram is still a great place for people to connect. They can search my first and last name on any social media platform, Dave Glaser, or daveglaser.com. So simply just a Google search of my name will bring up great places to connect.
Perfect. Well, thank you for hanging out with me. I appreciate your insights as always. And I appreciate that the levels that we can relate on with some of our what I would identify as struggles, and not so much maybe on your end. I really appreciate you being here, though, hanging out.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah. Talk to you soon.
Thank you again to Dave for joining us today to provide us with so much relationship wisdom. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Relatable Relationships Unfiltered. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and also give us a follow on Instagram at Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick.